In the land of Sparta, where children were taught to fight before they could speak, and honor was etched into their bones, the women were no less fierce. Among them was one whose name echoed through the marble halls like the clash of steel. Leonti, daughter of the commander Adrastos, was born during a blood-red eclipse, as auguries howled over the city. The midwives whispered that she came from Ares himself. At 12, she had bested her brothers in the wrestling ring. At 16, she had led a hunting party into the Taygetus Mountains and returned with 3 boars tied behind her chariot. Before we dive into this epic adventure, I invite you to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy stories that merge myth and mystery. And tell us, where are you joining us from? What time does your clock show? I want to read your comments, so we can build a wonderful community and all be connected. Leonti was not just respected, she was feared. She walked through the Spartan agora with a straight back and silent steps. Men lowered their gaze. Women watched her with a strange mix of envy and awe. She rarely spoke unless spoken to, and her words were chosen like arrows, never wasted. But there was something in her that few noticed. When she removed her armor at night, when the torches dimmed and the outside world faded, Leonti would gaze at the stars, not with a warrior's challenge, but with wonder. There was a softness buried in her, one that battle could not burn away. A longing not for marriage, not for conquest, but for something more, something the Spartan code had no name for. Peace, magic, mystery. She never said what she knew, that every full moon, when the city slowed and the warriors slept, her body drew her toward the cliffs above the Eurotas River. She left behind her spear, her breastplate, her reputation, and became just a woman wandering under the stars, alone. The world, she thought, must be bigger than Sparta, bigger than swords and pride. She felt it in her blood, like a music she could not hear, but knew was playing somewhere. And then, one night, under a sky so silver it seemed torn from the edge of a blade, she saw it, gliding across a tranquil pool in a hidden grove, a still swan, watching her, the moonlight rippling on its back, beautiful in a way no warrior had ever been. And from that moment, Leonti's life began to drift away from blood and battle towards something softer, stranger, and far more dangerous. The grove was hidden, untouched by the usual roughness of Spartan boots, nestled between 2 cliffs. It whispered of something older than Sparta, older even than Olympus. The trees curved in crescent arcs, their branches low and silvered by the moonlight. A shallow lake lay in the center, still as glass, and upon it, the swan. Its feathers shone like woven starlight, not white, not grey, but something in between. It floated with the silence of smoke, cutting the water without a single ripple. Its long neck arched with grace, as if sculpted by divine hands. And its eyes, God's, its eyes, held no animal wildness, no fear, only awareness. Leonti froze at the edge of the trees. Her training screamed caution. Nothing in nature moved like that. No creature stood so boldly before a human. But the swan did not flee. It watched her calmly, expectantly. She took a step forward. It inclined its head. Another step closer. The lake did not stir. She stood at the water's edge, heart beating steady, but alert, her hand resting lightly on the dagger strapped to her thigh. The swan moved again, slowly, deliberately toward her. When it reached the edge of the shallows, it stopped and bowed its head slightly. Leonti knelt. She had seen 1,000 things in her life: burning war camps, bloodied warriors screaming at the skies, newborn calves gasping for their first breath. But she had never seen anything so calm, so still, so enchanted. She reached out her hand. The swan did not resist. Her fingers brushed its feathers, warm, unnaturally warm, as if its body burned with sunlight instead of blood. A sensation stirred in her chest. Not fear, not fascination. Something older, something she hadn't known was missing until that very moment. Connection. The swan blinked once and turned, gliding back to the center of the lake. Leonti remained kneeling, watching it, unsure of what had just begun, but certain it was no accident. The next full moon, she returned. So did the swan, and so it went, the next month, and the next, without words, without promises, only presence, a ritual born of silence and gravity. By the time autumn settled on the hills, Leonti no longer questioned why. She just knew the swan would be waiting, and her world would never be the same. The seasons turned, leaves colored, fell, and grew again. Wars continued far below the hills, but in that moonlit grove, time stood still. Only the full moons mattered now, only those nights. Leonti had once measured her worth in battle scars, victories, and orders followed without question. But now something softer guided her, something far older than Spartan law. Each month she returned to the grove with offerings, fresh figs, soft fabrics, trinkets carved from olive wood. The swan never ate, never acknowledged the gifts, but Leonti continued, drawn by an instinct she could not explain. The swan was always waiting. It would meet her at the water's edge, dip its head gently, and then glide beside her. Sometimes it circled her, sometimes it just stood beside her on the bank, its warmth permeating the air around it like a hidden sun. She began to speak, not as a soldier, but as a woman who had never been heard before. She spoke of her father's coldness, of how victory never filled the emptiness in her chest, of the nights she stared at the sky, wondering if there was more than sword and soil. The swan said nothing, but it listened. She could feel it. Its stillness was not silence. It was attention, the kind mortals never gave, the kind no commander, no suitor, no friend had ever offered her. In time, she stopped feeling alone. She would braid her hair before each visit, smooth her tunics, sit beside the swan for hours, shoulder-brushing wing, saying little, but feeling more than she had ever felt in a Spartan palace or battlefield. And still, the swan never fled, never aged, never changed. She should have been afraid. There were stories of gods taking animal form to lure mortals to ruin, stories of punishments for those who loved the divine. But Leonti no longer believed in stories. She believed in the way her hand fit perfectly along the curve of the swan's neck, in the way it tilted its head when she sang softly in the night, in the way it seemed to wait for her, to need her. No words, no promises, but in their silence, something ancient took root. And though she did not speak the word, not even to herself, Leonti knew what it was. Love. The swan was not born of the earth. His wings had once spanned the sky. His fingers had plucked the lyre that brought forth the sun. His name was once whispered in temples, carved from marble, and cried out in song. Apollo, god of light, of music, of prophecy, now silent, feathered, bound. Long before Leonti was born, Apollo had committed a sin in the eyes of Olympus. He had challenged Zeus, not with sword or rebellion, but with truth. He had spoken against his father's punishments, against the cruelty passed down from throne to world, against the silence demanded by power. For this, Zeus did not kill him, he undid him. A spell cast in fury, more curse than justice. Apollo was stripped of his form, his voice, his divinity, forced into the body of a swan, not to teach him humility, but to remind him that he could shine like the sun and still be caged by shadow. The curse was crueler still. There was one condition. If a mortal ever discovered his true identity, the transformation would become permanent. And so Apollo waited. Years, centuries, lifetimes, floating in lakes, hiding under the stars, watching mortals forget his temples, forget his hymns, watching the world grow cold as the gods retreated, until Leonti, her presence cracked something inside him, something buried so deep, even Olympus had forgotten it existed. Hope. He never meant to be seen, never meant to stay, but she returned, time and time again. And her voice when she spoke to him in the grove, it was the only thing that made the fire inside him flicker again. She was not a priestess, not a nymph, not a chosen oracle. She was a warrior with hands that knew only weapons, a woman hardened by loss and trained to feel nothing. And yet, she saw him. She treated him not as a symbol or a threat, but as something sacred, something worth waiting for. He dared not speak, dared not reveal his name, but in the tilt of his head, in the stillness of his body, he answered every question she never asked. And slowly, impossibly, he loved her too. In Sparta, solitude was respected, but not for long. Leonti's absence did not go unnoticed. Every full moon, she slipped away from the barracks, from the training fields, from the watchful eyes of commanders and kin. At first, no one questioned her. She was Leonti, untouchable, unbreakable, the warrior whose loyalty was etched in every scar. But Sparta thrived on order, on discipline. And love, especially hidden love, was a foreign thing in a city built on control. The whispers began. She wanders. She speaks less in council. She trains, but her blows lack venom. It was true. Leonti had changed. Her movements were still sharp, but no longer cruel. Her voice no longer cut, and something in her eyes had softened. Some nights she would smile to herself, as if guarding a secret not even the gods could steal. Her father noticed first, Commander Adrastos, a man whose face held no softness, whose daughters were meant to lead men, not follow feelings. He summoned her one evening under the pretense of strategy, but when the chamber emptied, he spoke plainly. "What keeps you from your sleep?" Leonti offered no answer. His voice darkened. "Do not forget who you are." But she already had. At least, the version of herself Sparta had molded. What the city had built in stone, the swan had touched with water, and Leonti found herself unwilling to return to who she had been. Still, Sparta watched. A patrol followed her once outside the walls, tracking her steps toward the cliffs. They lost her near the olive groves. She was too skilled to be followed, but it was enough to breed suspicion. Priests muttered of auguries, of moonlight bringing voices, that the lakes beyond Sparta stirred unnaturally. A warrior woman, disappearing every full moon. They feared it was madness, or worse, a god. Leonti knew the walls were closing in, that eyes were learning to look where they had once looked away, that her silence, once a fortress, now made her vulnerable. But still she went. Still, she found him. And in that grove where moonlight touched feather, she forgot the noise of Sparta, forgot the rules, forgot the danger. Only one thing mattered now, not being seen. Because if the world discovered what she knew in her heart, it would destroy them both. The moon was heavy that night, low, swollen, golden as a dying flame. Leonti stood in her chamber, her fingers trembling on her armor, unable to fasten the last clasp. Something had changed. She had felt it for days, a quiet tremor under her feet, as if the earth itself knew what she ignored. The swan had been different at their last meeting, restless, more vigilant. His feathers ruffled when the wind shifted. He had circled her twice before settling beside her, his warmth sharp instead of comforting. That night, sleep eluded her, and when it came, it brought visions. She was in a silver grove, her hands covered in gold dust. A statue loomed before her, half man, half swan, its wings frozen in a half-beat, its face serene and lifeless. She reached out, spoke a name she didn't know she knew. Apollo. The statue cracked, and a voice echoed, not from the sky, but from within her bones. The truth will freeze what love has kindled. She woke breathless, heart pounding, the name still burning on her tongue. She tried to dismiss it. A dream, nothing more. But warriors know when fear is real, and this was no ordinary omen. It was prophecy. The next day, Leonti left Sparta earlier than usual, the ache in her chest sharper with every step. She did not follow her usual path. Her feet guided her deeper into the hills, through trees she had never passed, to groves untouched by memory. There, hidden under a curtain of ivy and moss, she found the altar, ancient, cracked, marked with a single, unmistakable inscription etched in old, flaking gold. A-P-O-L-L-O-N. Her breath caught. Suddenly, all the pieces clicked into place. The swan's warmth, its knowing gaze, the dreams, the curse in her bones, the reason it always came during the full moon. He was not just enchanted. He was a god, her god, and she had broken something. She stumbled backward, the sound of feathers behind her, and then the transformation began. The swan's neck arched, not with grace, but with agony. Its body shuddered, feathers dissolving into streams of gold and light, wings folding into arms, webbed feet splitting into toes that dug into the earth. And where the swan had been, a man now knelt, naked, radiant, broken, Apollo. His hair shone like the sky at dawn. His skin glowed faintly like embers under marble, but his eyes were shadowed with grief, with inevitability. Leonti fell back, hand to her mouth. She had loved him in silence, and now the silence had become unbearable. He tried to speak, but the curse had not fully lifted, his voice cracking like thunder in a storm too old to name. "No," he said at last, his voice barely more than wind. "You were not supposed to know. It was the only rule." She fell to her knees beside him, tears cutting paths down her warrior's face like rivers through mountain stone. "I didn't mean to," she whispered. He smiled then. "Just once. a god's smile, not of joy but of farewell. I know. And with that, the earth beneath them shuddered, a silent tremor, a divine sentence delivered without mercy. His radiance faded, his skin hardened, his limbs numbed in mid-motion. Apollo was turning to stone, and Leonti could only watch as love became legend. The instant the name was spoken, the curse began its final work. Apollo's body, once fluid with divinity, now stiffened inch by inch, the light under his skin dimming like cooling metal. His golden hair lost its sheen, hardening into strands of marble as the final phase of Zeus's punishment took hold. There would be no forgiveness, no reprieve. Leonti grabbed his hands, still warm, still trembling, but she could feel it, the stone advancing like frost over flesh. His fingers curled around hers one last time before they ceased to move at all. She shook her head. No, this cannot be the end. But the curse did not listen. It had waited centuries in silence, patient and cruel. Apollo's chest rose once more, and then it did not. His wings, half formed behind his shoulders, froze in a half fold. His knees, bent in pain, locked in place. His face, still beautiful, still kind, was trapped between love and sorrow. His eyes, open but unseeing. And then, silence. A silence deeper than any battlefield, deeper than the moments before the charge. This was not the silence of peace, but of loss, of something sacred shattered. Leonti knelt there, her forehead pressed against his now cold hand, a hand that once cradled stars, now nothing but stone. Her tears slid down the side of his marble fingers and fell to the earth, one after another, slow and steady, like a funeral march. The grove grew dark. Even the moon, so often bright and watchful, seemed to retreat behind a veil of clouds. There was no lightning, no god appeared, for the punishment had been served. Zeus had spoken, the swan had flown its last, and Apollo, god of light, was now a statue of silence, frozen forever in the moment of his final truth. Leonti stayed long after the transformation ended, her arms wrapped around what remained. She did not scream, did not curse the heavens. There were no Spartans to hear her wails, no warriors to witness it. Only the wind, only the trees, and the stone figure of a god who had once loved her, not with thunder and fire, but with stillness, and now with silence. Leonti never returned to Sparta. She left her armor where it lay by the altar. She unstrapped her sword. She let her warrior name fade like smoke over the lake. The woman who had once stood tall among kings now knelt in silence beside a statue that would never move again. The grove became her world. Every full moon she returned, never missing one. She brought no offerings, no incense, no prayers, only herself and a memory. She would sit by the statue of Apollo, her fingers tracing the cold stone hand she once held in flesh and blood. Sometimes she spoke, sometimes she hummed a song he had never heard, but that somehow she felt belonged to them both. Other times she just watched the water and said nothing. Villagers began to whisper. They said a woman haunted the hills, that she wandered in the moonlight with eyes like distant stars. Some said she had gone mad, others that she had been chosen, but no one dared disturb her. Years passed. Winters came and went. Empires shifted. Gods grew quiet. But Leonti remained. She grew old, but never weak. Her strength endured, less like a soldier, more like the roots of an olive tree clinging to the same piece of earth year after year, storm after storm. And still the statue remained, Apollo half kneeling, wings half formed behind him, his gaze fixed on the space where Leonti always sat, a moment frozen in marble, untouched by time. Some travelers claimed the stone was warm to the touch, that if you placed your hand against its chest, you could feel something faint, like the beat of a dream. And then one last full moon, Leonti came, sat beside him longer than usual, rested her head gently on his shoulder, and never moved again. When the villagers came weeks later, they found her there, peaceful, eyes closed, her lips curved in a faint smile. Beside her, the statue of Apollo glowed faintly, as if lit from within. No one touched her. They built no shrine, no temple, but the legend grew. And now, when the moon is full and the wind is still, some say the swan returns to the lake, not to be seen, but to remember. In the twilight of time, where myths intertwine with reality, emerges the story of Irion, a being born not of Olympus, but from the fusion of fire and steel. Deep in the forge of a mortal, Callista, This demigod was forged with a bold destiny, to snatch the eternal flame from Mount Olympus itself and rekindle the dampened hearts of humanity. But his path would not be simple. Colossal challenges awaited him. A three-headed guardian from the underworld, the fury of a jealous god with winged sandals, and the grim prophecy of an oracle who foresaw only one end, Irion's death. In the pulsing forge of Mycenae, where sweat and prayer shaped iron, lived Callista, a woman whose hands rivaled those of the gods. Her name resonated with the strength of steel. She forged swords capable of splitting spears in mid-air and armor, so perfect it was rumored Ares himself had worn it in battle. The gods noticed her talent, but only one descended, Istus, the lame god of the forge, the outcast of Olympus. He watched her in silence. He was not drawn to conventional beauty. Callista was not a woman of perfumes or palace gowns. She wore soot like war paint and smelled of iron and pine smoke. But in her work, Istus glimpsed something divine, something familiar. One night, under the red moon hanging over the Aegean, Istus entered her workshop, wreathed in smoke and shadow. He offered no gifts or divine decrees, only his presence. The forge glowed brighter that night, and 9 months later, a child was born, Irion. He did not cry at birth. His eyes opened and glowed like embers, and the forge fire danced as if recognizing kin. The midwives were astonished. One whispered, "He has been touched by the divine." Others, "He is ancient." And the eldest murmured, "He is not meant to stay here long." Irion grew faster than other children. At 5, he could shape iron. At 7, he forged his first sword, flawless, sharp, and strangely warm to the touch. He never played, never lied. There was a stillness in him that unsettled others. The town feared what it did not understand. They called him cursed, the son of a throneless god. Children avoided him. Priests refused to bless him. But Callista loved him fiercely, teaching him not only to work with fire but to respect it. "The flame obeys those who listen," she said, "not those who command." When he turned 16, Irion's forge burned day and night, crafting weapons for cities he would never see and kings he would never know. But even as the metal flowed under his hands, something deeper stirred within him. He was not made to serve, but to change the world. Long ago, the eternal flame had been a stolen gift from the heavens, defying existence itself, thanks to Prometheus. It was fire not just for warmth, but for thought, art, creation. It was what separated man from beast. But that era of defiance had dimmed. Humanity no longer remembered the debt it owed the gods, and the gods, in turn, had turned their backs. It began slowly. Hearths that once glowed endlessly began to flicker. Forests grew colder. Storms lasted longer. Crops withered in spring, and homes filled with the breath of frost even in high summer. Children shivered by dead fireplaces. Old women muttered prayers into heatless ashes. Priests spoke of punishment. Scholars blamed the stars. But in towns, cities, and empires, a different fear took root. Not that the world was ending, but that the gods had abandoned them, and they were right. Atop Mount Olympus, the gods had sealed the last true flame, a spark kept alive only in the divine brazier, untouched by mortal hands for centuries. No god dared share it again. They feared man's rebellion, feared what Prometheus had started. Let them suffer, they told themselves. They must remember their place. But not all gods agreed. In hidden corners of the world, whispers stirred. Dryads spoke of a boy born of fire. Nymphs saw sparks dancing in the eyes of a young man from Mycenae. The winds carried a name, Irion. In the cold chambers of Delphi, the oracle dreamed of fire walking on 2 legs, illuminating cities with its steps. And in the depths of forgotten temples, dying candles sputtered back to life at the sound of a smith's hammer striking an anvil. Irion had no idea of this. He only knew that iron was becoming harder to shape, that the flames in his forge required more breath, that the heat that once came easily was fading. But the world had begun to watch. Gods, both ancient and silent, had turned their gaze toward Mycenae. The divine brazier atop Olympus, though protected by marble and guarded by fate, flickered for the first time in centuries, responding not to a god, but to a boy born of fire and grief. And deep within him, something began to glow. Delphi was dying, once the center of divine council where kings and warriors ascended stone paths to seek Apollo's voice. It now lay silent, its columns cracked and overgrown, its sacred springs reduced to mist. But one voice still lingered, buried deep within the mountain, the oracle's breath. Irion arrived in silence. No one greeted him at the gates. The torches lining the temple had long gone out. Ivy clung to the broken altars like fingers, refusing to let go of lost faith. Thunder rumbled in the clouds above, not from rain, but from something older, watching. He descended into the hollow chamber where generations before him had wept and pleaded. Seated atop a crumbling stone throne was the oracle. She was covered in violet robes, her skin pale as ash, her eyes blind but blazing with storms. Before he could speak, she inhaled sharply, like a flame retracting into a lantern. "Irion," she hissed, though no one had spoken his name. He said nothing. "You will ascend the mountain, you will take the flame, and you will die." Her voice cracked like a whip in the stillness. He did not flinch. He had heard stories of oracles, their riddles wrapped in poetry and metaphor. But this was not a prophecy. It was a sentence. She rose slowly, her limbs moving like smoke trapped in the wind. "The gods will oppose you. The world will demand your failure. The flame you seek does not belong to mortals. It was stolen once, and the price was eternity in chains." Irion stepped forward, fists clenched. "Then let me pay the price." A long silence followed. Then laughter, not cruel, but tired, the sound of someone who had seen too many stories end the same way. "You already are," she whispered. The room darkened. The thunder outside swelled. The air pulsed with something ancient, something primordial. Then suddenly, all was still. The oracle slumped back into her seat. Her mouth opened, but only smoke escaped. Her prophecy was over, and though Irion left without another word, her vision followed him, in dreams, in flames, in every shadow cast by his forge. The gods had spoken, his path was set, but not even Olympus could predict what a dying world would do when its fire was returned. Before one could ascend Olympus, one had to earn the mountain's recognition, and Olympus never bowed to the untested. Legends whispered that the mountain's base was not stone or snow, but soul, that beneath its foundations was a door sealed by silence and guarded by creation's oldest fear, Cerberus, the hound of Hades. No one could pass that gate without first touching death. Irion did not question it. He had studied the myths as smiths study heat, closely, cautiously. He knew what waited beneath the roots of Olympus, but to reach the eternal flame, he would have to descend, not metaphorically, but into the underworld itself. So he prepared, not with armor, but with craft. He spent 3 days and 3 nights forging a collar, not for battle, but for submission. It was made of obsidian iron and the last ember from his mother's forge. On it, he etched 3 names, one for each of Cerberus's heads. He whispered them aloud as he worked: memory, loyalty, grief. On the 4th day, he stood before the shadowed mouth of a cave, said to lead down forever. The wind here was cold, but it didn't sting the skin. It scraped the soul, and the air smelled not of rot, but of forgotten prayers. He entered. Deeper and deeper he walked, past bones that glowed faintly in the dark, past torches that lit themselves without flame, until he heard it, the breathing, slow, massive, layered, like 3 storms dreaming in unison. Cerberus. He entered the clearing and found the beast sleeping on a bed of ash and bone. Each head twitched in a different rhythm. Its fur was blacker than absence. Its eyes were closed, but its ears moved. Irion did not draw a weapon. He approached, knelt, and held out the collar. Then softly, he began to hum. It was the song his mother had sung to him as a child, the one she sang when the night made the world feel too big, too cruel. The middle head stirred. The left opened an amber eye. The right growled, then stopped. They listened, and in that silence, Irion slipped the collar over Cerberus. Cerberus exhaled, and the gate behind him swung open, not with rage, but with respect. Irion had touched death, and death had stepped aside. The path to Olympus was not a path at all. There were no markers, no stars to guide the way, only sheer rock, biting wind, and whispers that echoed from nowhere. Irion ascended, not with certainty, but with instinct, in the towering silence of the heights, where mortal breath mingles with divine essence. His earthly hands bled, his demigod blood burned. The mountain, Mount Olympus, resisted every step like a sleeping titan waking to an intrusion. And then he appeared, not with a crash, not in a flash of power, but in an almost mocking silence. Hermes, the cunning messenger, the god of trickery and thieves, emerged on a rocky ledge, dressed as a traveller, a loose cloak, sandals adorned with feathers, and eyes as sharp as broken crystal. A sly smile danced on his lips. "Well," he mused, spinning a coin between his nimble fingers, "I pictured you taller, Irion." The demigod did not stop his ascent. "I know why you are here," Hermes continued, strolling casually beside him without even moving his feet. "You want to return fire to the mortals. How sweet, how noble, how stupid." Irion paused in his climb. "Then stop me." Hermes chuckled softly. "Stop you? Oh no. No, I am not here to fight you. I am here to ensure you understand the bargain you are facing. You are walking into the heart of Olympus, into the vault of the gods, into a story that does not belong to you. And yet, here I am," Irion replied with unshakable resolve. The winged god's smile faded slightly. "You are trying to restore a balance that was broken for a reason," Hermes explained, his tone now more serious. "The flame was a gift once, a mistake, and now the gods guard it like a dragon guards its gold, not because it is precious, but because it is dangerous." Irion stared at him. Have they forgotten what danger looks like? For the first time, Hermes' expression darkened. The air around him seemed to charge. The coin in his hand vanished, and his wings twitched slightly. "You think you are Prometheus," he hissed, his voice now icy, "but you are not even a spark compared to him." "I am not trying to be him," Irion retorted firmly. "I am trying to finish what he started." Hermes stepped forward and pressed 2 fingers against Irion's chest. A pang of pain shot through him, not physical, but something deeper, a thread inside him twisting and turning. "The fire you seek," Hermes whispered, "will burn away everything you are." And with that grim warning, he vanished. The mountain groaned, thunder cracked, and a storm broke, not of rain, but of consequences. And Irion continued his ascent, cursed, but unbroken. The curse settled in Irion's chest like frost in the lungs. At first it was subtle, a tightness in his breath, a dull heat under the skin, but the higher he climbed, the more it clawed at him. It was not like a wound, but a relentless erosion. Little by little, the man was stripped away, leaving behind something raw and essential. Mount Olympus ceased to be a mere mountain. It came alive. Its cliffs shifted under his feet. The wind howled through gorges like ancient voices, furious at being disturbed. The higher he climbed, the less mortal the world became. The trees stopped growing, the birds stopped singing, even the stars above seemed to pull back. There were no paths, only jagged ledges and sheer walls that demanded sacrifice. With every step, Irion bled. Once he slipped and nearly fell to his death, but a sudden flash of heat from within stabilized him. It was as if the flame Hermes spoke of, the one that would burn him, had begun to awaken. But he kept climbing, because every time he faltered, he thought of the dying hearths, of the cold villages, of children huddled in darkness. He thought of his mother, her hands still steady, forging warmth for a world that forgot what warmth meant. And still, Olympus offered no mercy. Storm clouds gathered above him. Lightning danced along the ridge, like gods pacing in frustration. He could feel their eyes now, watching him, judging him, waiting for his fall. But it was not just the mountain fighting him. It was Olympus itself. He passed ancient ruins carved into the stone, temples abandoned by faith long ago, their altars cracked, their gods forgotten. Statues of Athena, with their eyes shattered, columns of Zeus split by time and silence. Irion understood something no one else had dared to say aloud. The gods were no longer all-powerful. They were afraid. Afraid that a mortal could bring back the fire without their permission, that someone not born in their halls could bring the light that once defined Olympus. And in that fear, they threw their worst at him. Ice, thunder, visions, voices. But he climbed on, hands torn, heart burning. He rose above the clouds, and in the distance, lit not by the sun, but by a divine flame, he saw it, the brazier, burning, waiting. It was not what he expected. The summit of Olympus was not carved in marble or guarded by gods in gold. There were no trumpets, no gates, no thunderous welcome of divinity. There was only silence, and the flame. It stood in the center of a windless clearing, upon a pedestal of blackened stone. The brazier looked ancient, older than language itself, shaped by forgotten hands, and within it danced the eternal flame, not red, not orange, but white, pure, blinding, alive. It did not flicker, it watched. Irion approached. The heat did not burn him, it washed over him, as if recognizing something long lost. His breath caught, his skin prickled. That ember Hermes had cursed in his heart, now beat like a second heart, calling to the flame like a lost brother. He reached out his hand. In that instant, time wavered. He saw cities built with firelight. He saw his mother's forge burning in midwinter. He saw civilizations rise and fall, each built around fire, and each forgetting why it burned. He also saw Prometheus's punishment, chained to a rock, his liver devoured daily by a vulture. The gods had called it justice, but Irion saw it for what it was, fear wearing a crown. He could turn back. He could let humanity adapt to the cold. Let them forget fire. Let them forget him. But then he heard the wind whisper a name, Callista, and he remembered who he was. He took the flame, and it took him. Pain screamed through his body, not like a burn, but as if he were being rewritten. His bones cracked and reformed. His skin blazed. His veins pulsed with light. He fell to his knees, roaring without sound, as the flame poured into every part of him, erasing the boy and forging the firebringer. He no longer held it. He was the flame. The brazier flickered, then dimmed, then grew cold, for the eternal flame was no longer chained to Olympus. It had chosen a new vessel. Irion collapsed beside the empty pedestal. Smoke rose from his fingers, but his eyes glowed like the dawn. He barely breathed, but with each breath, a wisp of heat spread outward, into the wind, down the mountain, toward the world. He had taken the fire, but not for himself, for everyone. Irion did not walk down from Olympus. He carried it with him. The moment the flame entered him, the mountain stopped resisting. The winds quieted. The sky cleared. Even the stone beneath his feet seemed to shift and guide him, not with reverence, but with recognition. He was no longer an intruder. He was a torch. His body burned with a divine heat, not the kind that sears, but the kind that stirs life. Wherever his foot touched the earth, the frost melted. With every breath, the cursed wind softened. The air smelled not of smoke, but of renewal, of rebirth. But he was not whole. His limbs trembled under the weight of what he carried. The eternal flame was not just fire. It was memory. He could feel every spark it had ever lit. The first campfire in a prehistoric cave, the torch that lit Athens, the forge that built Troy. And he felt the cost of it all. He saw the cities burned in its name, the temples erected, the wars fought with stolen fire and ambition. The gift of the gods had never been innocent, but this time he would not give it as a weapon. He descended through clouds and silence, past broken statues of gods who were once worshipped, now crumbling in a divine decay. He passed the cave where Cerberus had guarded the gate, but the beast was gone, as if even death had stepped aside for what Irion had become. He reached the world below, and there, in a frozen village where hearths had long turned to ash, the people gathered around him, not in fear, but in wonder. He did not speak. He simply extended his hand, and a flame danced from his fingers to the nearest hearth. It roared to life, then another, and another. A chorus of heat spread from hearth to hearth, city to city, across lands that had forgotten what it felt like to gather around a fire without praying first. Irion burned, his hair glowed like molten gold, his skin cracked like cooling obsidian. He was dying, but not fading. He was becoming something else. He had not stolen the flame. He had become it, and wherever it burned, the world whispered his name, not in worship, but in gratitude. No tomb was ever built for Irion, no statue carved, no songs sung in temples. There was no procession, no mourning, no final battle to mark his passing. And yet, he never vanished. After the fires returned, strange things began to happen across the land. In distant villages, where no traveller had passed, hearths would light themselves. Entire forests, once frozen to the core, bloomed overnight. Smiths swore their forges heated faster. Children huddled in the cold told their parents of seeing a man of light standing by the flame before it rose. No one could prove anything, but everyone told the same story. He walked until there was nothing left of him to keep walking. His body had cracked and burned away long ago, not from weakness, but from transformation. What was left of Irion, bone-blood voice had become spark, smoke, heat, and he gave it all away. His mother's forge was the last place he touched. Old, abandoned, its fires cold for decades, until one night, a passing traveller claimed to have seen a boy hammering something white-hot on the anvil. When he looked again, the forge was empty, but the flame danced high and hot, just as it used to. They say the gods felt it, that Olympus, sensing it had been stripped of its power, trembled in its silence. But the gods did not retaliate. They did not rage, because even they understood that Irion had not challenged them with war or pride. He had reminded them of their purpose. And so the eternal flame, once hoarded by immortals, now flickered in every village, every city, every lonely mountain cabin. It lived in the warmth of a soup shared by strangers, in candles set by grieving hands, in torches raised by rebels seeking light in the darkest places. And always, always, they whispered the same name, Irion. Some say when your fire dims for no reason, it is him passing by. Others say if you listen closely to the crackle of the flame, you will hear the rhythm of a hammer striking an anvil, steady, patient, eternal. Because Irion never died, he became the warmth itself, not a god, not a hero, just a boy who gave up everything to help the world remember how to glow again. Melanian was not born under a palace roof, nor among the incense of a temple. He came into the world under a weeping willow during a storm that split the sky in two. His mother, a midwife's daughter, wrapped him in linen as thunder rattled the hills. Birds scattered, rain danced, and the child did not cry. He hummed. From the moment he could walk, music followed him. Streams whispered melodies when he knelt to drink. Leaves trembled in harmony as he passed. He needed no instruction. Sound belonged to him. At 10, he could mimic any birdsong and weave it into a song. At 16, he played the lyre with such grace that even hardened warriors stopped to listen. He sang of rivers, lost brothers, fields before the war, songs that filled men's eyes with tears they didn't know they had. People called him a gift, a miracle, a child of divine breath. He never claimed it. Melanian travelled from village to village, sharing his music without coin or pride. His voice calmed fevers. His chords softened hardened hearts. He once played for a dying child, who, upon hearing his lullaby, smiled and slipped into death as if it were a dream. But not all ears that listened were mortal. One spring afternoon, as he sat by a bright river, strumming a tune about starlight, the air around him changed. The wind slowed, the water stilled, even the frogs silenced their song. And then they came, the Muses, 9 of them, stepping lightly from behind the veil of the world, wrapped in light and sound. Each carried her own essence, history, tragedy, dance, epic poetry, and more. Their eyes were not kind or cruel, only wise. They listened, and then to Melanian's astonishment, they sang back to him, 9 voices in perfect, ancient-than-language harmony. Melanian closed his eyes, and without thinking, he joined them. His voice did not echo theirs. It evolved them. When the last note fell into silence, even the stars seemed to lean closer. One of the Muses, Calliope, the eldest and most severe, touched his forehead. "You are not ordinary," she said. "You are a vessel." And so began the legend of Melanian, the bard whose voice would make the heavens tremble. From that night, Melanian was no longer just a talented mortal. He was touched, marked, whispered about. The Muses had chosen him. In the quiet folds of Mount Helicon, where few dared to tread, they invited him into their sacred circle. There, under ancient trees and skies clear of mortal ambition, Melanian learned, not through lessons, but through experience. Clio whispered the histories of nations into his ears as he slept. Terpsichore danced barefoot through the leaves as he played beside her, his fingers learning the rhythm of wind and body. Euterpe placed her flute in his palm and only said, "Listen," and he did. He absorbed not just melodies, but truths, the kind that lived between words, the kind mortals rarely noticed, but felt in the silence before a storm, in the ache of longing, in a child's gasp at the first snow. The Muses gave him not power, but perspective, and asked only one thing in return, that he sing for them, them meaning mortals, the lost, the weary, the proud and broken, those who needed to remember that beauty still existed even in suffering. That song could be both balm and sword. At first, Melanian obeyed. He performed in city forums and quiet fields, played for kings and beggars alike. His songs mended broken hearts, stirred revolutions, reconciled fathers and daughters, and enemies into an uneasy peace. But as his gift grew, so did something else. Ambition. He began to chase sounds the Muses had not taught him, notes no god had ever touched. In the quietest parts of the night, he wrote alone, creating fragments of something beyond language, a song that could bend time, still the wind, and make stone weep. A final song he told no one about, not even the Muses, because some part of him no longer wanted to share the divine, he wanted to surpass it. And the Muses, ever watchful, saw the change, not in his fingers, but in his eyes, in the way he looked past them, as if destiny owed him more than admiration. And in the distance, destiny stirred slightly, for no mortal walks beside the divine forever without cost. Melanian retreated from the world. He left behind the applause, the requests, the gifts of kings, and the adoration of cities. He stopped performing in public. He stopped teaching his students. He even stopped speaking with the Muses. Some claimed he had taken ill. Others said he had died. But in truth, he had gone to the shadowed slopes of Mount Helicon, deeper than any mortal had ever gone, where only echoes of the old gods resonated. There, in a cave lined with crystals that sang when touched by light, he began to compose the final song. Pieces of it came to him, sometimes in dreams, sometimes in thunder, sometimes in a silence so deep it frightened him. He did not write it, he found it, like a secret hidden between the folds of reality. The melody refused to stay still. It changed when he breathed. It twisted with his heartbeat. It was not a song to be performed. It was truth in sound. He heard the birth of stars in its opening note. He felt the death of empires in its fall. It was not sad. It was not joyful. It simply was. He worked for months, perhaps years. Time bent strangely inside the cave. He ate little, slept only when the music allowed. He wept one moment, laughed the next, as if the song played through his soul instead of his hands. And when it was finished, the world changed. Birds stopped in mid-flight. Trees leaned toward the mountain without wind. Streams grew quiet. The sky itself held its breath. And high above, in the marble chambers of Olympus, the gods turned their heads. Even the Moirai, who never looked up from their weaving, paused. Clotho whispered. A thread trembles. Lachesis frowned. And Atropos, whose shears never wavered, set them aside. They listened. The song did not demand worship. It did not beg to be loved. It simply revealed everything. When the last note faded, even the cave refused to echo it, as if the world knew to repeat it would be a crime. The gods waited. The Muses waited. They expected Melanian to return, to offer this marvel to the world, but he did not. He hid it. And in doing so, he set a different music in motion, one of silence and consequence. When Melanian emerged from the cave, the world felt smaller. The skies, once so vast, seemed pale next to the echoes of the song still ringing in his bones. People rushed to greet him. Musicians, poets, even priests. They begged to hear what he had written, to feel whatever power had moved the heavens. But Melanian said nothing. They asked again. He smiled faintly. Not yet. Only the Muses saw the change. They approached him at dusk, stepping out of the starlight like breath from a lyre. Their robes shimmered with inspiration, but their eyes held a warning. You were chosen to bring beauty, said Erato, soft and grieved. But beauty is not meant to be buried, added Clio. You must sing it, whispered Calliope. Melanian bowed his head. I will not let it be cheapened. They flinched as if he had struck them. You think mortals are unworthy? Asked Terpsichore, her voice trembling. You think you alone are its keeper? He met their eyes, not with rage, but with something colder. Possession. Yes. The silence felt like winter between them. Then you are no longer ours, said Calliope. Not because you created something beyond us, but because you hoard it. He said nothing, and they vanished. Still, the gods waited. Even Zeus, who rarely bothered with mortal affairs, paused his thunder to listen. Even Hades tilted his head in the deep. They waited for a single note, a whisper, a fragment. Nothing came. Melanian kept the song locked inside himself, unwritten, unrecorded, unshared. He called it sacred, but sacred things, when sealed too long, begin to sour. He played other pieces. They were still beautiful. Audiences wept. Crowds cheered. But he knew, and so did the divine. something was missing. And worse, something had been stolen. The song that could move the Moirai, bend time, and touch the gods themselves, was buried beneath his pride. He told himself he was protecting it, but the Muses, watching from afar, saw the truth. He had chained the divine to his ego, and the gods, who endure madness, war, and worship without flinching, do not tolerate theft. And so, one night, the wind stilled, the stars went quiet, and a curse began to bloom, not with fire, but with memory. The curse came softly, no thunder, no divine anger from Olympus, just a dream. Melanian lay under an open sky, cradled in the same silence he had once treasured. The dream pulled him gently into darkness, and there, waiting, was the song, the final song. It returned clearer, richer, impossibly perfect. He heard notes he had never written, harmonies he had not yet imagined. It lifted him through the stars, plunged him into oceans, unraveled the very fabric of meaning. He wept with joy, with awe, with surrender. And then, it was gone. Not faded, erased. Not a memory, not a note, not a name. The melody he had written with his soul, felt in his bones, was gone like mist at dawn. At first, he thought it a cruel trick of sleep. He grabbed his lyre and tried to remember even a single progression. Nothing. He strummed wildly, out of tune, frantic, nothing. That night he returned to his bed early, heart pounding, and the song returned, more radiant than ever. He sang with it in the dream, tears streaming down his face, fingers dancing through the light. It felt real. He could remember it inside the dream. But once again, with the first breath of dawn, it was gone. Melanian began keeping candles lit through the night, scribbling notes in the dark, begging his mind to hold on to one phrase, one rhythm, a single image. But no matter what he tried, it vanished, again and again. He stopped playing, refused to perform. The crowds dwindled, friends left, his home filled with dust and cold, but none of it mattered. He now had a single obsession, to remember the song. The Muses stayed at a distance, watching with sorrow. He was given a gift, said Euterpe, and he chose to cage it. Now he is the only one who will ever hear it, said Polyhymnia, and he will never remember it, whispered Clio. It was not revenge, it was balance. Melanian would hear the song every night for eternity, but it would live only in dreams. Every dawn, it would slip through his hands like water through cracked fingers. He would never stop chasing it, never stop waiting, and in time, the hope would rot into madness. Because what haunts a bard more than forgetting the best song he ever knew, and knowing it still sings without him? Melanian stopped counting the nights. They bled into one another, an endless loop of ecstasy and loss. Each night he slipped into dreams, where the final song embraced him like a lover returned from war. And each dawn, he woke alone, screaming, weeping, blank. At first, he tried to outsmart the curse. He hired scribes to sleep beside him, begged seers to pull fragments from his mind, sang into mirrors, hoping his own voice would betray some hidden memory. Nothing worked, and slowly, he began to unravel. He stopped eating. His robes hung from a hollow frame. His fingers trembled when he reached for his lyre, the very instrument he once cradled like a child. The strings snapped under his shaking hands. He did not fix them. He no longer needed them. Because in the dream, the music still came. It became his only purpose, the only place he felt whole, and waking became a punishment. He cursed the sun, shattered his windows, locked himself in a lightless room, but still the song left with the morning. When he emerged, he no longer looked like a bard. His eyes were wild, gaunt, his once golden voice, now a rasp from nights of desperate humming. He wandered from village to village like a beggar, not for coin, but for memories. "Have you heard it?" he would ask strangers. "The song with no beginning or end? Have you heard it in your dreams?" People mocked him at first, then feared him. Some threw stones, others fled. He began to sing fragments in the streets, bursts of random, frantic melody. They made no sense to others, but to him they were clues, keys, pieces of a broken mirror he could almost put back together, but every time it slipped through his hands. He would laugh when he failed, then weep, then laugh again, and every night the song returned, bright, whole, just out of reach. The Muses watched, not with anger, but with sadness. He had once been their finest vessel, now he was a cracked jar, spilling over only when no one could hear. And in that descent, the song he had hoarded became the thing that unralek, that him, not with fire, not with rage, but with silence. Melanian no longer lived in the world, his body walked through it, yes, but his mind was elsewhere, trapped between dreams and daylight, past and present, a song only he could hear, and only when it was too late to hold. He wandered barefoot through cities that had once welcomed him as a king, children who once sat at his feet, now fled from his shadow. His name, once sung in praise, became a warning. Don't end up like Melanian. He slept where he could, under trees, in empty chapels, sometimes on the doorsteps of inns whose owners once begged for his presence. He no longer asked for food, only a place to rest, only the dream. The curse never failed. Every night he fell asleep with trembling hope, and the final song returned, complete, alive, a perfect ghost. And every morning he woke to oblivion. The cruelty was not in the silence, but in the memory of the sound. He remembered that he had heard something transcendent, that it had meant everything, but he could no longer remember why. He began to talk to shadows, to trees, to the stars. Sometimes he would grab strangers and demand they give him the song back, convinced the melody was hiding in someone else's throat. Once, he thought a child had hummed it while passing. He followed the family through 2 villages, before collapsing in the dust, begging the child to sing again. But the sound had been something else, something ordinary. He wept for hours. And still, every night, the song returned, mocking, embracing, divine. He tried to hum it while dreaming, tried to wake himself mid-melody, but the curse was cunning. He could not move within the dream, could not record it, write it, carry it with him, only hear it. And when he woke, empty. Some who saw him said he still hummed in his sleep, that if you put your ear to his mouth at midnight, you could hear music unlike any other, but only then, only in the dark. The Muses no longer came, the gods stopped watching, and Melanian, once the voice of the world, now wandered like an echo of a song the world could no longer remember, and he could no longer forget. Melanian had grown thin as twilight. His skin, once kissed by golden light, was now pale and paper-thin. His voice, what was left of it, was rough from years of whispers and wandering. He no longer looked for food, or shelter, or even the song. He just walked. One evening, he came to a cliff overlooking the sea. It was quiet there. No villages, no roads, no prying eyes, just the wind, the waves, and the stars, rising slowly in the deep blue. He curled up against a stone, the sea breeze tangling what was left of his hair. He did not weep, did not sing, he just closed his eyes. And the dream came again. But this time, something was different. There was no delay, no mist to wade through, no struggle to hear. The final song was there from the beginning, whole and clear. But it was not just sound, it was a place, a presence, a world built of music. Melanian was inside it, barefoot on chords that bent like grass, stars pulsing above in rhythm. The sky was a symphony, the wind sang in harmony, and he did not just hear it, he was part of it. His own voice joined the song, and it did not waver, did not forget, it soared. He saw every note he had lost, every phrase he had mourned, but now he understood. The song had never left him, it had grown without him, it had become more than his hands could hold. He was not its owner, he was its witness. And in that final dream, there was no sorrow, no shame, no punishment, only release. When the sun rose, Melanian did not move. The wind rose gently around his body, as if carrying away a final breath. A shepherd passing on the cliffs found him later, peaceful, his hands resting on his chest, as if cradling an invisible lyre. There was no scroll, no recording, but high above, in the coastal sky, the seabirds flew in strange formations, almost as if dancing to something only they could hear. And the sea, for a moment, sang, not in words, not in melody, but in something older than both, something he had finally become. Melanian was buried under a lone olive tree near the cliff where he last slept. No priest officiated the rites, no crowds gathered, only the shepherd who found him, and a few villagers who remembered the stories, faint, dry echoes of the bard who once made the gods hold their breath. There was no monument, only silence. But silence has a way of amplifying the truth. In the years that followed, Strange things were whispered across the land. Travelers claimed that if you passed that cliff under the new moon, you could hear a melody on the wind. Brief, fleeting, heartbreakingly beautiful. Not a full song, just a note, just enough to make you stop. Children began to dream of music they had never heard. Musicians woke in the night with tears on their cheeks, and no memory of why. And sometimes, when a bard sat alone at dusk, with no audience, a sudden chord would form under his fingers, something not his own, something perfect. They never remembered it. The Muses said nothing. They did not curse another bard. They did not reclaim the song, because they understood what Melanian had become. Not a warning, not a hero, but a vessel turned legend. A soul whose punishment was born not of cruelty, but of refusal, and whose redemption came, not through sharing, but through surrender. The final song was never written. It was never performed in amphitheaters or temples. It does not exist on scroll or scripture, but it lives in the quiet moments between sleep and waking, in the silence before a performer strikes his first chord, in the way the sea sounds different when you are grieving. Melanian's song became part of the world itself, not to be remembered, but to be felt, a whisper in the bones, a melody without words. And those who feel it, even for a moment, never forget the silence that follows. They say if you stand alone on the right cliff, in the right kind of wind, you might hear a sound that does not belong to this world, just a fragment, just a breath. And perhaps if you listen closely enough, you will finally understand why Melanian never let it go. And so, dear night owls of history, we come to the end of this dreamlike journey. We have navigated the turbulent waters of the myth of Irion, the bearer of a flame that ignited hope in a frozen world. And we have immersed ourselves in the lyrical tragedy of Leonti and her forbidden love for a silenced god. Finally, we lost ourselves in the elusive melody of Melanian, a reminder that sometimes the deepest beauty lies not in what is shared, but in the silent echo that resonates in the soul. If these stories have ignited a spark in your imagination, if the echoes of the past resonate in your dreams, I invite you to continue exploring the fascinating shadows of history here at the Nocturnal Historian. Subscribe so you don't miss our next tales, where we will unearth more mysteries and legends that sleep beneath the cloak of night. Let us know in the comments which story moved you the most, and what other tales you would like us to dust off from the archives of time. The night is young, and history is infinite. Until the next vigil, dreamers, may your nights be filled with stories and your awakenings with curiosity.